we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. I'm your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you ever want to reach out to the podcast, don't hesitate to hit us up on our Twitter or Instagram at the Bigmark Pod or at the Bigmark Podcast. If you ever want to let us know a topic you want to hear about, or if you even want to be a guest on the show, drop us a line and we'll chat. Again, if you ever wanted to donate to the podcast, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you know when all the next videos are coming, and drop a comment and like and share and do all that fun stuff, because it really helps grow the podcast and we really appreciate it. Thank you all for being here tonight. I was really inspired to do today's episode because I've just recently started reading his book. But I wanted to talk about Rick Rubin today, and he's a really, really interesting person, producer, character, just influential being that kind of exists on the planet. And like I mentioned, I started reading his new book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being. And he's quoted in talking about the book. He's quoted in saying, I set out to write a book on how to make a great work of art. Instead, it revealed itself to be a book on how to be. So it's a really interesting book so far. Like, I probably have to do a completely separate episode on it alone. I don't even know if I could, because it just covers such broad, sweeping ideas that it's funny. Even Rick in the beginning of his book, the preface, he was kind of saying, these are not facts, these are more thoughts, all the things that he kind of lines out in the book. But he also said, some of these things will seem like old ideas that just make sense, and then some might seem like revelations. So, it's interesting because, Rick Rubin, if you know a little bit about music, you don't necessarily have to be an expert, but maybe not necessarily everyone knows him as a household name. He is definitely one of the most famous musical producers, and a producer, for anyone who doesn't know, and check out one of my podcasts on production, music production. A producer, there's many definitions of what a producer is, and historically speaking, a producer was, someone who kept an eye on the budget of a record. And, record albums used to be, multi-$1,000 budgets, tens of thousands, hundreds of $1,000s back in the day. But, thousands and thousands of dollars running around. Someone needed to kind of like have everything put together. And then it was similar to a movie producer. You're kind of like the money man, idea person, and you kind of like facilitate things happening, which makes sense. You need that person when you're making music. You need someone to kind of like work the controls and do the recording business too. And back in the day, that used to be an engineer, but today the producer kind of takes care of all that production and musical, like any of like the audio, like manipulation, if you will, mastering, even after the music is recording, kind of how you manipulate the sound afterwards. So that's all the job of the producer. But it's kind of morphed again out of that whole just like facilitator realm into, an extra member of the band, if you will. That's how I've kind of likened them. And if not that, then they're almost like the coach of the band. If you'll indulge one of my continual analogies and comparing sports and music, in the sense that I see a producer kind of as the coach of the band that you're kind of choosing, and they help you bring those ideas that you've been writing together and bringing and doing together, and bring them into a more, not necessarily more, but put them into a package that is acceptable to the masses. And that's kind of where Rick Rubin comes in, and he's a really interesting producer in that sense, where he's kind of broken that mold and got away from the whole like business side of things and really moved into more the creativity and the creative space where they're actually producing and creating the music itself. And that really opened the door for a lot of producers now that are working in the field and can lend their ideas and their kind of musical knowledge to the artists as well. And that's the fine line that you have to tread when you're a producer, is that you don't want to just make it your own. You still want the idea to be that of the bands. You don't want to just like every band that you work with, you don't just want all their music to sound exactly the same because you just forced it through your put it in your mold and shaped everything so it sounds just like you. The idea of the role or the ultimate goal of a good producer is that you are letting the band's best, you're like putting the band's best foot forward. You're letting them shine through. And again, Rick Rubin is that's his bread and butter. And his whole, like, there's almost like a mythology around Rick Rubin because, he himself fully admits that he's not necessarily a good musician. He can kind of barely play guitar, and he said he's just he's not very good. He's not bad. But his expertise doesn't necessarily lie in the mechanics of playing the music. He is basically hired for his taste, for what he knows, how he can hear music and how he can hear potential in music and also get the most out of the artist too, right? Like you want to create an environment or put your artist in a position that they're thriving and that they're comfortable and in the best sense, or they're in the best mindset. My God, I don't even know exactly what I'm trying to say here, but the idea is that the producer is setting you up for the best success possible. And that can take a multitude of things. And it's funny because in Rick's book, he kind of outlines that there's no right or wrong to anything. In the Sound City documentary, which is a great documentary by Dave Grohl, talks about a historical, super famous recording studio. Corey Taylor from Slipknot is talking about working with one of their producers. I'm sorry, I forget his name. But they were like in the middle of recording and getting after it. And, I've done some recording. I've done some recording with indie rock bands, but most recently been doing the recordings with Reckless Harbor. Shout out Reckless Harbor, my band. Check us out. We're cool indie folk, but that's so much more chill. Like everyone's just sitting on couches, having a good time. But these like super heavy rock bands really seem like they are almost kind of like set themselves up that they're almost like doing like a concert when they're doing a lot of their recordings to really capture that super high energy. And their producer at the time, I guess, was wanting to get the most out of Corey and threw a candle at the wall and it exploded and splashed wax all over Corey's face, and he screamed into the microphone, and he got that performance out of the artist. So again, sometimes producers might take drastic measures, but again, Rick's whole approach is relatively hands-off. But it's interesting the way he is kind of in some ways deified in the musical community. And I think it was People magazine or some magazine ranked him as one of the most influential people in the world. He's just like, the mythology of Rick Rubin is is vast, and in my opinion, well deserved. I mean, in my research, I found that there was some criticism and some people that had some beefs with Rick, but his resume kind of speaks for itself. So a little bit about Rick himself. I mean, I thought we'd talk about a little bit about his life anyway, because he kind of had an interesting background. He was born Frederick J. Rubin, March 10th, 1963. So he's a 60-year-old kid. Grew up in a Jewish family in Lido Beach, New York. He was born in Long Beach and went to high school there. He learned guitar and like some early kind of recording techniques from his high school AV teacher. His first band ever was called The Pricks, and one of their claims to fame is that they got kicked out of CBGB's because during their set there was a huge brawl that busted out in the club, and it turned out that Rick kind of facilitated that and planned it, and he got his buddies to start the fight. So again, Rick is an idea man. You know what I'm saying? Again, living in New York, like, you can't not be surrounded by, well, you are inherently surrounded by many cultures. It's the mecca, if you will, of fashion and music and culture in general. So growing up in New York must have been fantastic. And while he was in university at at NYU, he helped found Def Jam Records with Russell Simmons. And in doing that, he basically helped popularize hip-hop music. So that would have been in the 80s, and at the time, hip-hop was really just kind of burgeoning, and no one really respected it very much, sadly. But Rick worked with when he was at Def Jam, worked with the Beastie Boys, Run DMC, Ghetto Boys, Public Enemy, LL Cool J, amongst others. He eventually left Def Jam and started Def American Records because there was like a beef with the president of Def Jam at the time. So Rick left, and in 2007 he was named head of Columbia Records. And again, like I said, Rick has an extensive resume that speaks for itself. And again, it was only in my research that I found that someone had any criticism about Rick's work, and I understand that maybe it's not for everybody, and that kind of more laid back spiritual approach might not be for everyone. But he's worked with many great artists over many genres, like ones I've mentioned already, but he's worked with Red Hot Chili Peppers, Slayer, Danzig, Andrew Dice Clay, Mick Jagger, Tom Petty. He did a lot of work with Tom Petty, and in fact, in Sound City, the record studio that I just mentioned, check out one of our old episodes. We did it on that. Johnny Cash, he worked with Johnny when Johnny did those American series, when he kind of like made a little bit of a comeback just before he passed away, and dropped a bunch of stuff, put a bunch of music out there, kind of probably knowing that he wasn't going to be around for too much longer. He worked with Nine Inch Nails, AC/DC, and AC/DC is really interesting because I know Rick learned a lot from them, because AC/DC, when you talk about music production, is so just bare bones, nothing fancy, barely any effects on anything. You can, everything is panned in the headphones, if you will. So if no one knows what that means, just the guitar sounds like it's more coming from your left ear, and the bass sounds like it's more coming from your other ear, and the drums are right in the middle, and the vocals are somewhere around there too. So you can do that in the music production. You can kind of change, and it's called panning, from left to right. You can change where it sounds in the musical, in your like audio headscape kind of thing. He's worked with Rage Against the Machine, like I said, another heavier band that when they worked on one of their first albums, they basically, like they said, set it up like a concert, and they said recorded almost their whole first album in one take, and that was at Sound City again, like I mentioned. He's worked with System of a Down. He helped produce Jay-Z's 99 Problems, and he was in the video. So if anyone's seen the video of Jay-Z's 99 Problems, you recognize Rick. Worked with Slipknot, Little John, Audio Slave, Shakira, Neil Diamond, the Dixie Chicks, Metallica, Weezer, Linkin Park, the Avett Brothers, Lana Del Rey, Adele, Lady Gaga, Ed Sheeran, Wu-Tang Clan, Eminem, and Kanye. So like I said, his resume, speaks for itself. Like, he's worked with all these great people, and like I said, there's almost kind of this X factor. There's something, is je ne sais quoi. There's something you can't necessarily put into words about Rick Rubin. He, again, doesn't necessarily lend any musical knowledge per se, but he just knows where things go. He just finds out, and it's really spiritual. And he talks about, again, I don't want to delve too far in the book because I haven't finished it, and I want to do another episode on it. But he really talks about how you really have to kind of let the creative process happen. Some people need to, quiet everything down and make sure everything's settled and have a completely quiet exterior so they can help quiet their interior. Some people can kind of create on a dime wherever it is. So there's no real rhyme or reason to it. But again, you can't force it. Whatever it is, you just can't force it, because for some reason, when you force creativity, it leads to making compromises, and that, leads to kind of like mediocrity, right? So again, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, when Rick wrote that book, he said he wanted to write it to help people create a great work of art, and he talks about this in the book too, but it's true statement that life is art and art is life. We live in a creative environment, no matter what it is. You don't necessarily have to be an artist to be creative. Taking a different route to work because there's traffic, it takes creativity. Making a meal out of ingredients in the fridge that, you don't have a recipe, putting that together, that takes creativity. As soon as you decide to make something, create it and make it, it exists, and you are the maker of that thing. I heard Nick Offerman say, if you decide to make a doghouse and you get some pieces of wood and you nail them together, and there's a roof and there's walls and your dog can go in it and the dog is happy and you're happy with it, you are a woodworker. You made that doghouse out of wood. And you can always get better at it, but at that moment you are now a woodworker. And whatever creative endeavor you might be taking part in, as soon as you begin that creative endeavor, you are that thing. And like I said, there's a million different approaches to creativity and how people actually take that and put it into practice, because, an idea is just an idea until you can kind of put pen to paper, if you will. And then things kind of become more of, craft. It becomes a craft at a certain point when you have to kind of get down to the nitty gritty and really work out the structure, if you will, of that creation, whatever it might be. I mean, I'm talking about songs because that's what, I know I've been trying to create, and it is becoming so difficult for me to like come up with a song and bring it to the band. And I feel like every single day that goes by, I'm getting more worried about, like just not having something to bring to the rest of the band, because all the other guys have been writing amazing songs and bringing new things and this and that. And I just feel like I'm just so far behind, and I don't even know where to start. And I feel like I haven't even I know where to start, but even that isn't going to get me to where I need to be anyway. there's just so many negative thoughts around creating a song, and I'm trying so hard and have all these great ideas, but I just can't finish them off, and I just really need to do that. I know I do, and we're at a place with the band right now that we have a really good set list, and we have it really down pat, and we've been playing it hard, but we're at the point now where it's time to introduce some new songs. So the timing couldn't be perfect for me to bring a new song to the table, but in some ways, like, I don't want my first ever song, like, so much self-doubt. Welcome to the life of an artist, everyone. Anyway, back to Rick Rubin. Production style. His production style, like I mentioned, he has his trademark kind of stripped down sound, and that I believe, again, he kind of took a lot of that knowledge from working with AC/DC, and he can get honest and exciting performances out of his artists, and that's the most important thing. I've seen clips of him working with like Flea one-on-one, and I can, again, like I said, there's very little criticism out there of him, but I can see some artists being frustrated with his approaches because they are so kind of like roundabout. It's like, imagine you're not a rock band or something like that, or think of yourself coming, like, he tries to put you almost in a thought experiment to try and bring you out of that kind of negative, or not negative, but that kind of rigid thinking, and allow that creative process to kind of flow through you. He has the ability and the patience to let the music be discovered and not manufactured, which I thought was a really interesting quote. And it does take a patience. There's something really special about that, because you can't rush these processes, right? You can't push these things faster than they need to be pushed. Even though there are time constraints in the music business, there's no timeline on how you create. So patience is key. And again, like as I've alluded to, there's some criticisms of his work. He's been criticized for being too loud, something called the loudness war. He was accused of overcompressing and clipping the music to create artificial loudness, which I think is a technique that you can do post production or post recording, I should say, and alter the structure of the music that it sounds artificially louder than it is. So it's not increasing the volume, but it's just making it sound loud. And a lot of critics say, like, it makes the music unlistenable. And that's, again, Rick's technique. And he worked with a lot of heavy artists that probably wanted their sound to be as loud as possible. And he said, hey, I have this technique of making it sound super fucking loud and huge. And again, that's the thing with production. You get to choose your producer. No one's saying you have to work with Rick Rubin, even though he is the man. And if I ever got to work with Rick Rubin, it would be a bloody dream. And I'm super excited to continue reading his book and finish it off soon and put some of his ideas into practice. Because again, those ideas that they just click and you're just like, that feels like I've been reminded of that. Not necessarily, I'm learning that for the first time. Those thoughts are brilliant, and keep chasing those and keep putting yourself in an environment that allows that creativity to flow. Whether that means completely shutting everything down or completely immersing yourself in the flow. Let go of that branch and flow down the river. It'll feel a lot less turbulent. And then listen to every album Rick Rubin produced. He's amazing. Thank you all for listening. I love you all. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, like it, subscribe, hit us up on our Twitter, hit us up on our Instagram, share it, Patreon. Love y'all. Talk to you soon. Peace.